Welcome to another edition of Conversation with Friends. My name is R.O. Smith, and this is Whitney Skala, and we're continuing our series in which we're bringing people from our community, and we're going to highlight some of the amazing things we're doing. And Whitney has a Museum Spotlight Europe website that he has designed, and he's going to be going on a trip to Europe. Is that correct?
That's right. Upcoming in about 3 weeks.
3 weeks. All right. And so, why this trip? Why this trip in the first place? What is Museum Spotlight Europe, and what are you trying to do with it?
Yeah. Well, let me explain the trip by backing up and talking about the website.
Okay.
So about 3 or 4 years ago, an idea to do something on the internet came to me. I wanted to get smarter about the internet. I mean, who doesn't?
Right.
And I'm an attorney. I do business and real estate work. My clients are all involved in the internet in one way or another. They're either that's the subject matter of their business, or they're marketing their business on the internet. So I need to know more about this. I wanted to do something that was enriching for me, that was exciting for me. Maybe even at the time I was in my late 50s. I'm now 63, so maybe a personal renaissance.
Okay.
And so this just kind of hit me. Let's do a website that highlights the museums of Europe, and that's what Museum Spotlight Europe does.
Okay.
We talk about art museums, we talk about World War II museums, we're just about to post an article on the best food museums in Europe. Lots of good chocolate museums.
That's awesome. Okay, so you're a lawyer by day. Where did your interest in museums come from? Like, have you always been interested in museums? Ever since you were a kid? Is it a more recent thing?
Yeah, I wish I could draw a straight line for you on that.
We don't do straight lines.
I don't. It just seemed like something that would be really interesting. You know, I just enumerated that there's a bunch of different museums, right? And so we're learning about all sorts of different subject matter. That's one thing I really like. Another thing I really like about museums is, in so many instances, it's where humanity tells its story, right? We understand that when we go to an auto museum, that's an easy medium for us to connect to. But when we go to an art museum, it's a little harder because a lot of us don't understand that medium, don't understand its history. But it's much the same. And so in terms of, including as a Christian, but as a human, in terms of connecting with other people who have stories to tell, or where there's stories behind what they've created, what they've made, what they've lived. You know, a World War II museum is not about what we've created, but it is definitely about what we've lived. All right, I want to connect. I want to hear those stories. And as I go through museums, our local museums, as I go through European museums, even remotely, I receive those stories. And it's really incumbent on me to get a little smarter about what's going on there, so that I can hear those messages more clearly and more deeply.
So obviously, and you alluded to this, that you love learning.
Yeah.
So
yes.
you have high curiosity. All that. Where did that stem from? I mean, where did that curiosity come from?
Well, in 1983, after I took the bar. Which is a good way to kill all curiosity that you might be carrying within you. And my wife and I went on an 11-week trip to Europe. And this trip I'm going to go on now actually is correspondingly 11 weeks. But and that for me was this sort of personal renaissance moment, you know, where I could. We learned about so much. It wasn't a museum tour back in 1983. It was a lot of other things. But to fast forward to now, I feel like I'm 63. I have all these tools laying around that I've developed over the last 63 years, or been given, or however you acquire tools. And I want to keep using those. And my job, which I love, doesn't necessarily require that I employ all those tools every day. Right. So where'd the creativity come from? Frankly, I think I've had that. But what I've recognized about myself is that the creative aspect is not going to be stretched within the confines of my career. My career requires that I be creative, but you wouldn't call a law practice. I mean, I'm not dissing a law practice, but you wouldn't call a law practice something that really nurtures creativity, right? I mean, that's compared to
You kind of have your boundaries of where you're working within.
Yeah.
You don't really, but you're like, I'm curious about this, but I can't. There's no outlet for it.
I think that's a boundary, as you put it. So, so I've always looked to other pursuits, and in fact, right here in the church, in the past, I've been in charge of our men's retreat, and that's been a creativity outlet. I don't want to call that an alter ego because it's not a switch I try to flip,
right.
But it's definitely on the spectrum. It's a different part that I want to make sure is alive and breathing and is part of my life. So here we are. I'm creating a website. Well, that's journalism, which I have a little bit of background in. That's internet stuff. That's art. A lot of different disciplines, and it's fantastic.
So how does this curiosity or learning, how do you find that it plays out in your own spiritual life?
Yeah, well, just from a practical sense, I think I mentioned being involved in men's retreats in the past. And we've done stuff there. And, it's no news to the church, to the Christian community, that creativity and artistic expression, whether that's performance art or art on a canvas, is a way to relay a message that sometimes the spoken word can't quite get there for us, So definitely an interest there, and a recognition within Christian ministry that's how we deliver the messages sometimes. And then I think too, and this is a personal aspect of the trip for me, I think I'm just going to think more about how God created us with an artistic, an expressive side. I want to be a little careful that we're not pigeonholing this whole thing just into art. Right. It's an expressive side, and again, it's maybe a little reach to call museums a sacred place in the same sense that you and I would think of a sacred place, but it's not too far a reach to put the same values on these museums, and to recognize them in the same way. And again, I get back to the notion of messages. There's a message coming from these places, and sometimes it's a playful message, sometimes it's a lighthearted message, and that's fantastic too. And that's a message to us. If you've been up to the Broad Museum in downtown Los Angeles, contemporary art.
Oh, right.
One of the artists, fantastic pieces that he does. If you remember, there's magicians and others who make little balloon art for kids, right? They'll take the long balloons, they'll twist them around and give the 5-year-old little dog. Well, art in that Broad Museum includes an oversized, metallic, shiny balloon dog, and it's 20 feet high.
Yeah.
And it's playful, it's fantastic, and you look at it and it takes you back to when you were 5 years old. And it helps you just shed a lot of adult baggage. All right, well, you can go to the Broad, which I think is free, and see that and shed your adult baggage, or you can go to a weekend retreat and pay a couple $1,000s,
right,
and have a bunch of incense and have a fantastic time and get rid of that same baggage.
So you're against incense, I see. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'll be carrying some in my suitcase. But you get what I'm saying. So, and I'm not dissing the weekend things. I'm just contrasting and also trying to emphasize the potential of that moment you could experience if you allow yourself in those museum spaces. And sometimes we have outdoor art. We don't have to be inside a museum. We have outdoor art.
So I'm thinking of my personal times when I go to museums. What is it about museums that you call them sacred, and we different with them? Why I feel like they get us to that sacred place. What is it? Is it because of the way? Is it the architecture? Is it just or is it because we're prepared to go and look at these pieces? Why do you think we're so open to reflection? Where it feels like sometimes when we come to church, the place where we should be reflecting, for some reason we find ourselves busier,
Yeah.
But at museums, you feel like, man, wow, you just feel moved by whether an artwork or a sculpture or just being in the museum. Why do you think museums have that ability to get us there that maybe churches have lost?
Yeah. Well, we might talk to our friends, the architects. I mean, I hate to be so practical about it, but when you're sitting in a large room and you've got some perspective on the art piece, right? That's a good that's a fortunate museum that had that kind of space. And so I think, in all honesty, that's by design. There is something about that piece that you're looking at. It's static, right? It's not going anywhere. It's going to sit there and it's going to let you walk around it. Particularly if it's a statue. If it's a statue, it's frequently out in the middle of the room somewhere. And you can walk around it and you can sit for as long as you want to. I'm reading a book right now, Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen.
Love language, speaking my love.
Yeah, I'm only like 5 or 10 pages into it. I can't really tell on my Kindle.
Wait till you get 40 pages, it'll.
Yeah, but the first thing he talks about is actually seeing that museum or actually seeing that piece by Rembrandt. And he goes to the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg and enjoys that, and he sits there for hours.
Right.
He sits there for hours. And then if you read A Month in Siena, very popular book and fantastic, but that author spends a lot of time in some museums in Siena and nearby, and he just sits there. He just sits there and looks at the piece. And I think that really helps in the in the moment. And I'll add one more thing, which is, even if you go to a museum with somebody, you usually experience it individually.
Right.
And it's just you and that painting, sculpture, and that moment. And I think that's what helps bring us to that. And then I think a recognition that you're seeing something, no matter what it may look like, you know that a lot of that artist's heart and soul ended up in that work. Works like by Jackson Pollock. It's just a bunch of squirts on a canvas, and yet we know that as an artist, he was one of the more thoughtful, tortured. A lot of stuff was going on inside him that he gave to those canvases. We may not have the background into him, we may not have the background into the art form, but intuitively, most of us know that dynamic happened. And yeah, that's sacred.
There's so many, I feel like there's so many like spiritual things you can draw from that. I mean, just even thinking about like you know, when you go and you sit with that painting, you're looking at it, you're reading it, and then in a way you find that it's actually reading you.
Absolutely.
You know, and like when we think of the Word of God, like we read it, but if we spend enough time in it, it's actually going to start reading us. And the other thing I was thinking about is if you go with a friend, you experience it individually, but the beauty of it is that you go to lunch and you're like, you just begin to share. Like here's my perspectives, and there's something, and then you end up finding yourself enraptured in what your friend or your wife or whoever their experience too, and it's just like so full and rich.
It's fantastic, and unfortunately, either we had a bad experience or we feel like we don't understand what's going on. Why would I be here? And that's understandable. That's we take a friend to a baseball game or whatever, and they're like, I don't even understand the sport.
Right.
So people do that.
Right.
And that's understandable. But recognizing as a first step that, yes, I'm going to step into a deeper conversation, and I'm going to engage it when I'm capable of engaging it, and I'm just going to keep moving when I'm not. That's fine. It's a buffet line. If you don't want a piece of apple pie, move on to the vegetables. That's fine. That's fine. I want to put in a plug for Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Museums, in connection with what we're talking about right now. The Smithsonian Museums in Washington, D.C. are free. And I'm just going to say that again. They're free. Why?
What's parking? No, I'm just
yeah. No.
But
and they're air conditioned,
right?
But which is really good. But the reason I emphasize that is because what it means is you, as someone attending that museum, a visitor, you have the freedom to spend as much or as little time there as you want without having to worry about, I just spent $18 for me, and $12 for my teenager. No,
Right.
walk into that museum, enjoy it for as long as you want to or not, and then leave.
Yeah.
And come back for another 45 minutes tomorrow and see that piece again. Get in the conversation with the museum the way the conversation should be, free of any concern about passing that threshold at the entrance.
Right.
That's a fantastic gift of those museums to the rest of us.
You talk about this being a personal renaissance. You kind of
Yes.
talk about that. What are you hoping to find in this Renaissance trip, or what are you hoping God will show you about Himself in this trip?
At my point in life and in my career, I feel like a lot of my peers are on a bit of a glide path. 63 years old, I've been doing this for 35 years, finally maybe getting the hang of it, sort of, and known for doing certain areas of law. So people send me those clients. So I don't want to say it's getting easier, but some things about it are getting easier. And that's got to be true for all my law peers.
Right.
So I'm just a little wary of that kind of glide path thing, right? I hear a little bit too much about the big new hobbies, wine tasting. Right. Love wine tasting. Who doesn't love wine tasting? But that's not expressive and connective enough
For you. Right.
for me.
Right.
For me. So while I'm wine tasting, I'm looking for something a little deeper. And in terms of spiritual, what I'm looking for on this, I think what I'm looking for is some of those conversations with the art, some conversations with museum staff, some conversations with some people who I'm already connecting with. Journeys like this just produce their own results. If those results are too planned or too anticipated, then they don't come through with the same depth sometimes, the same, message to you that resonates. Because this is not a programmed, it's a scheduled 11 weeks, but it's not a programmed pilgrimage for myself. There's definitely pilgrimage aspects to it, primarily being alone and then interfacing constantly with human creativity, humanity, as expressed through these museums. So that's fantastic. But again, I think where this leads, who I am coming out the other end, I don't really know. But I'm doing it in part so that I'm available for that kind of, I've used the word renaissance, personal renaissance, excitement about new things, directions about new things.
Yeah, I love what you said. Just like you feel like you don't want to glide. Like it's just like I think so often it's almost like we're trained as this American dream is like retire and glide, whatever. And it's like I find so many people resisting that. Like, no, that's not how we were created to. We're not created to just glide. We're created to like learn and grow and become more of who we were created to be, and I love that.
I try to see it as seamless in terms of everything informing each other. And yeah, there's extremes and there's stuff that maybe doesn't help one another. But how much do we learn, for example, by doing a triathlon? How much do we learn by doing that helps us in our job?
Yeah.
Yeah. So all these disparate things, the fact that there may not be a conversation among them is really our own fault for not connecting some dots.
Right.
So a while back, for 2.5, 3 years, I was president of the board of directors of the San Diego Repertory Theater. They do fantastic work. And interestingly, because we're talking about art, we're talking about expression, and we're talking about our, how many of us really don't have the vocabulary or the training to connect comfortably to those media.
Right.
So when someone goes to a play and and the play doesn't resonate with them, what do they say? They walk out of there and they say, I'm not going to another play. that's ridiculous.
Or that play was terrible.
Yeah, that play was terrible, but definitely the message is, wild horses could not drag me back to another play.
Right.
Baseball game. You go to a game and after 9 innings the score is 2-0. Those 2 runs were scored on one swing.
Right.
That got the guy on first who walked, right?
Right.
He didn't even get a single. Okay, so it's 2-0, and it's by any stretch of the imagination a boring 3 hours.
Right.
You walk out of that game, most people, and they say, hey, next Saturday night's bobblehead night. We gotta come back. Yeah, we gotta come back.
Right.
Or
Right.
okay, now our team's only 3 games behind. Nobody denounces the sport.
Right.
Nobody walks on and says baseball's the stupidest thing, but we do that with theaters and other cultural expressions.
We do it with church.
We probably do it with church. Yeah. Well,
We didn't like that. The pastor didn't.
What kind of funky song was that?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, guitars.
Yeah. We went an hour 5 today. What's with that?
Yeah.
So yeah. So what does that say? Well, part of it is, if we're putting on those media, we need to recognize that dynamic, right? We need to give people permission to not like what they just saw for an hour in church or for 2 hours at the theater, but still embrace the medium. And so the second thing is, we need to watch our own language of how we're expressing ourselves. We use a lot of insider talk.
Right.
Are you washed in the blood?
Right.
I hope not. What happened?
What does that mean?
Yeah, you just took my kid into Sunday school. Don't pull anything funky there.
Right.
These are concepts that may be literally true.
Right.
They're also strong metaphors, and both the literal and the metaphor needs to be properly explained. We do. I enjoy hymns. I'm not militant about that, but I enjoy hymns. But do we ever explain the background of the hymn?
Right.
No, we don't have time. And we could do a whole hymn sing once every 6 months on a Sunday evening and explain every hymn, give all the backstories, and get all that hymn out of our system, and then go contemporary on Sunday. Right. But we're losing. My point isn't hymns versus contemporary. My point is we're losing connection with the hymns because we've never communicated the rich backstories of these songs. And so
and I think some of this, it relies on us understanding context, taking time to understand context.
Yeah.
I mean, like even with scripture, I mean, we condense it to 140 characters or less on Twitter, and we say that's the gospel, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much context that like we just blow past, and we wonder why people are disenfranchised, disinterested, and like don't want anything to do with the church. Because what we do say is weird, like washed in the blood or what. But it's well, there's a lot of context to that we need to kind of let people. But part of it is, are people willing to take the time for that context, and stuff like going back to the theater. It's like, I don't want to go back to the theater. Well, there's context to that, that you have to kind of.
So let's use the theater as an example or a metaphor. So most theater nights are Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and our church day is Sunday. But maybe we need to invite people Tuesday night for background night.
Right.
We're gonna explain what the heck is going on in there.
We're gonna show you behind the scenes a little bit or something. Yeah.
We say with a sneer sometimes, well, we just live in an unchurched society now.
Right.
Well, that may be true, and we can talk about that baggage later in some sense. But what I want to bring out is we're dealing with people who are a blank canvas. They pretty much understand some Christmas stuff, probably are really blank on Easter stuff.
Totally.
And when we get up there and we're like plucking verses out of the Gospel of John or the Psalms, and the Psalms has a silent P. What is that? And we wonder, we wonder, like, why we're not retaining people, let alone winning their hearts,
Right.
spiritually. Why we're not retaining people. They're good for 6 months or whatever it is, and then they spin out. We need to be sensitive to those gaps. We need to be able to put ourselves empathetically in their shoes and really think about what's going on in their world, in their minds, what we are asking of them, what they think we're asking of them. Are we really asking them to please be there every Sunday?
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Whitney. This is amazing, and good luck on your trip. And I'm looking forward already to the stories and the way that God meets you on this personal renaissance. And so,
well, thanks for your time. We'll be on Instagram.
All right.
So actually, you can share it every day.
So make sure you follow that on Instagram. We'll show it here at the bottom of the screen. And thanks for joining us this morning for Conversation with Friends. And we'll hope to see you. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube page and for any of the things that are coming up. So take care.